people, as long as they look like real people. So welcome. It's been 4 months since I did one of these COVID talks. People started emailing me and asking me in person to do another one. Probably a couple of weeks ago, 2-3 weeks ago that started, probably because of the second wave coming. So here we are. So welcome. This is being recorded, so it will get sent out possibly as soon as tomorrow, though more likely probably Monday or Tuesday. So you can pass it along to anybody or re-listen as desired. So just want to acknowledge you all for, again, spending your valuable time with me. I just hope to be of service, and there's one message that I hope you walk away from this from, and that's to feel empowered. There's too much helplessness, depression, and anxiety out there when it's not totally necessary, in my opinion. FDA disclaimer, I'm going to make it again because I don't want to get in trouble for illegally promoting any prevention or treatments for COVID. Even though I will certainly make recommendations again on what I would do for myself or a loved one should they get it, and some of mine have. I actually had a lot of people email me questions ahead of time, so I've inserted questions into my little kind of presentation. So I will ask questions that have been asked of me and then answer those, and we'll cover vaccinations, of course, is probably the biggest question on everyone's mind. Lockdowns, masks, and then treatment. I think those are probably the top 4 general ideas that people are hoping to hear from me on. Science is not black and white. It is not right or wrong. It is an evolving picture. And I want to emphasize that again. I emphasized this the last few times, but I think it's so important. This year, I feel like there has been more polarization than I've ever encountered in my lifetime. I'm not, I wasn't around in the 60s. Maybe some of you have many different experiences, obviously, but in my lifetime, I have not ever seen a year that had so much kind of black and white thinking or right or wrong thinking. And so I just want to acknowledge that on the science front, because this is more of a sciencey type of talk, it's not a political talk, it's a science talk. And what some of my ideas were 6 months ago have evolved. Almost everything in science is always evolving. What is right today will not be right tomorrow or 100 years from now. And so I just I want to insert that premise here. So I would just kind of ask a rhetorical question. How have you all been during these last 9 months? Mainly socially and emotionally. I'm kind of curious. Again, that's a rhetorical question, so don't answer because we got a lot of stuff to go over, but maybe take a second or two to answer that in your own mind. The last 9 months, I mean, from virus that we've never seen before, to lockdowns, to social unrest, racial unrest, fires, election, second wave, more lockdowns, vaccines are around the corner, probably mandates, vaccination mandates might be around the corner. Seems like every day, every week, we're experiencing something that really just challenges our sense of stability and safety, I would say. And that has brought about a lot of emotional unrest. So again, my main message to you during this time is to hopefully walk away feeling empowered. So a question I was asked very directly, am I afraid of this yet? Because I stated before I was not. No, I am not. I'm absolutely not afraid of this virus. On a scale of 0 to 10, if 0 we're not worried at all and 10 we're extremely worried, I'm probably a half or maybe a 1. In other words, I'm cautious. I would completely acknowledge this is an issue that faces a lot of people, but I myself am not afraid. And it's for the reason that I've expressed before. It's the power of the terrain, the power of my own terrain. When I do the things that I know are healthy, maybe not sexy, but unhealthy, but healthy, I know that my body can withstand almost any infection, right? Any natural infection. And those unsexy things include things like getting sunlight, getting clean air, getting clean food, clean water, happy thoughts, whether that's from some people it might be reading scripture, some people it's meditation, some people it's yoga, other people it might be reading fun and happy books, et cetera, et cetera. Lots of deep breathing without a mask on, and socializing as much as safely possible. And then some very basic supplementation that I'll be talking about later. Again, I have said this, for 7 or 8 months now, that this is more of a disease of malnutrition. That's why people with so-called comorbidities are the ones who die, by and large. There's always exceptions. There's always exceptions to the rule, but by and large, this is a disease of malnutrition. And so I know when I take care of myself in the ways that I've just mentioned, I am not at nearly the risk that the news media would have you believe, and nearly as much as the actual data shows us, right? There's definitely a second wave. There's definitely a second wave of cases. There's definitely a second wave of deaths. These are not trivial numbers that are coming in. They're probably off a little bit one way or another for a multitude of reasons, but it's a real thing, of course. I've been asked a lot, what are our stats like at Oasis, right? Because especially with this second wave coming. So our stats at Oasis, depending how you define an active patient, some practices define that as who's come in the last 12 months, others it's a year, the last 18 months. Some practices define an active patient up to anybody who's been in their office in the last 3 years. So kind of depending how you determine that, we at Oasis, we have anywhere from 1 to 3,000 active patients in our practice. Almost exactly 50% are 65 and older. It ranges from newborns all the way up. I don't know if we have any centenarians currently, but close to that for sure. And many of those are immunocompromised. Some of you who I see on my screen are immunocompromised. We have a lot of folks with cancer here who are coming for more natural therapies to support their system. So we have, again, 50% of our population of our patients at Oasis are kind of by definition at greater risk, right, for COVID and for deaths, for hospitalizations. The first couple months it was interesting. I didn't want to speak out too much about our stats because it had only been a couple months. At this point, we're 9 months in. No deaths in our practice, 0 hospitalizations. We haven't even had to send anyone to the hospital. Outside of a couple of individuals who came to us for the first time out in the back of our office, who then they needed to just go right to the hospital. They had never been seen by us previously, and they were kind of past that point of return. But no patient who had ever been established with our practice has even needed to be sent by us to the hospital, much less be hospitalized, much less gone to the ICU or died. Now, if I'm wrong about that, if any of you are on here and you know differently or experience differently, please let me know, because I do want to portray completely accurate numbers for a practice. But it's interesting because statistically speaking, out of, call it a couple thousand active patients, we should have had to send a couple dozen to the hospital over these past 9 months, and we should have had a couple of deaths due to COVID. That hasn't happened, to my knowledge, to our knowledge. We've had, I believe, I haven't kept an Excel spreadsheet, but I believe it's close to 100 cases, whether that was having had COVID or have antibodies that knew they had previously been sick or were asymptomatic. Some have had low oxygenation, so low O2 sats. So pretty like touch and go, kind of like, okay, here's what we're gonna do, keep me update, like, how are you doing the next day? How are you doing the next day? Obviously, we're gonna send you to the hospital if things go down that path. So a few definitely very serious cases. Had a couple of what I would call, might be called long haulers. For those of you who are not aware, quite a number of people who get COVID end up having, they'll get through that kind of critical 2 to 3 week time period, but then they're still left with these symptoms of fatigue and other neurological symptoms for the long haul. I've had a few of those, but all of these have gotten better and better and better over time, and I would say have resolved or are in the process of resolving. So again, please let me know if I'm wrong on our kind of OASIS statistics. But it's very encouraging, and I think it speaks a lot to how we think and hopefully how we are helping you all, helping our patients to work with your terrain, right? The stronger we get your terrain, the more resilient you become. And this is a message that I hope that each of you will pass along to those of you who know others who might be at least a little bit accepting to the idea, because people need to know this and need to be empowered by these kind of numbers. And yeah, I'll move on. Did I see the second wave coming? Yes, I did. With a couple of caveats. My opinion 4 or 5 months ago was that New York would probably not have much of a second wave, probably would have a little of one, but it probably would not be deadly. I think that's bearing out. Time will tell. I mean, we're only in December 3rd, so we haven't even hit winter yet, technically. Although this is December and January are typically in the US the time of the most deaths in the US. Every year, that's how it goes. So I would expect nothing less this year. Now, is COVID going to get a bad rap because of it? Absolutely. But we would expect deaths to go up now. I mean, New York was hit so hard that I kind of thought there would be some kind of herd immunity reached. And it's interesting, cases are going up again for sure. So there's this second wave. But deaths are barely going up now. I don't know. We'll see what happens over the next 3 to 4 weeks. But judging by, there's approximately a 22-day lag between when cases start rising and then when deaths start going up. 22 seems to be the number, that the sweet spot there. It could be somewhere 20 days, upwards of 28 days, but 22, I think, is probably the most accurate number that we have thus far. And again, cases started going up in New York long before. So I think I'm right to some extent. Sweden would be the other one because that's one of the larger countries that never did lock down. They had their first wave. They're certainly having a second wave of cases, and they had a little spike in deaths recently, but it's started going down, and it started going down before they enacted, kind of for the first time, any type of lockdown. So yes, they started a kind of mild version of a lockdown. I think it was it's less than 2 weeks ago, but their deaths started going down like a couple days before their lockdowns. So I don't, people will say, oh, they locked down finally and that decreased deaths. That's not bearing out in the data so far. Kind of figured we would have a second wave in California because California was locked down and we were never allowed to kind of go through the natural course of things, whether right or wrong. So it was predictable that California would have a second wave of deaths included. Interestingly, I mean, the timing of this talk is interesting because yesterday I think was the more documented deaths from COVID in the US than we've had to date. So definitely a real situation going on. In California, hospitalizations and ICU admissions are, if they're not higher than they've been, they're probably going to surpass what they've been this entire year in the next few days or weeks. I think I will send out an email. I sent out before a presentation by Ivor Cummins. I think he does another excellent podcast with Ari Whitten. He seems to just, I like him because he has one of the most impressive kind of synthesis of world data and analysis that I've seen from anybody. And he doesn't seem to be too biased. I mean, we all have our biases, of course, as he does, but he doesn't seem to be too biased. So I will encourage anybody right now can go Google Ari Whitten podcast Ivor Cummins if they're interested, but it will go out in the email. He really talks about mortality in different countries and why and when. He talks about Sweden. He points out that lockdowns in various countries have very little to do with actual mortality. And you can listen to him discuss that because I don't want to get too long in the tooth here. Let me look at the next question. Yeah, so I'm going to skip over that. I would say just quickly on the case fatality rate, I was asked about this, are there any updates? I think the World Health Organization has stated it's 0.13 at this point. The Dr. Iodonis, and forgive my mispronunciation, out of Stanford. Again, he's one of the most cited researchers in the world when it comes to immunity. He states that it's still around 0.23. I think the World Health Organization has said there's about 800 million. There's been 800 million infections, so kind of just shy of a billion, 1 billion with a B. 1 million, a little over 1 million have died thus far. That would point to a case fatality rate of 0.13%, which again is kind of close to a bad flu season, possibly. Don't want to compare it to the flu too much, but at the same time, it's not nearly as concerning when you look at it that way. Immunity, this is a big one because it was a big issue in those first few months. How long, if someone catches it and gets antibodies, how long are they immune? And the antibody thing is interesting. There's a Japanese study of over 200 people where they just tested people in the beginning, and there was like a 5%, so 10 out of 200 had antibodies, and then they followed them over the course of a few months. I think this was a 4 or even 6 month study. Somewhere in the middle, 45% of them tested positive for having had antibodies. And then by the end of that 4 or 6 month time frame, it went back down to 4%. So you can see where people are losing antibodies. Now, that does not mean you're not immune to it. And because your body has memory B cells and memory T cells. And so there's this antibody response, there's a T cell response, there's an innate immune system response. our body has memory to it. And this makes sense. And this is kind of what just looking at the other coronaviruses, I'm not an immunologist, but looking at what happens with the other coronaviruses, this is what I kind of suspected would happen. Our immune system seems to keep our immune system at least 6 months. Now, the studies technically, they've only gone to 6 months at this point, but it's going to continue. Once you get sick with this, you will be immune for a good while, most likely. At least a year, probably 3, 4, or 5 years would be my guess. Our body, every time we encounter a new virus, we make antibodies to it. Those antibodies always have to dip down or even go away, become undetectable on laboratory testing. The reason is because if we did that and we kept around all of our antibodies at maximal levels for every virus, every bacteria that we ever encountered, our whole body would just literally explode with antibodies. We'd become this major autoimmune explosion, right? And so, again, this is kind of predictable. It doesn't mean that just because you test negative for antibodies that you're not immune. There's so much more to the immune system. So I think that's important I think it brings a certain amount of comfort, hopefully, to people. In terms of recurrent COVID infections, this is, on the documented level, I think this is still less than probably around 100 cases throughout the world. I still don't think this is much of a issue. I would certainly not worry about it. It's what's going to happen is people are exposed to the SARS-CoV-2. You'll mount some response, whether it's asymptomatic or symptomatic. You'll have this. You'll make some amount of memory B cells, some amount of memory T cells, and then you might go a month before you're exposed to it again, or maybe it's 2 years before you're exposed to it again, and then your body will remember it, and your reaction will be even less severe. And you kind of get these natural boosts. That's what happens with the common cold coronaviruses. That's what will happen with this, assuming it doesn't just completely die out, or assuming vaccinations don't do that for us. But the issue of reinfection is, I would consider it almost a non-issue. The other big one, I definitely get this asked a lot, masks. Are masks helpful? Absolutely. They are somewhat useful when used correctly. There's a lot of mask studies. Should masks be mandated? Maybe in certain situations, maybe in nursing homes, maybe in hospitals. I mean, we've used them. Surgeons have always masked up, right? There's certain situations where using a mask makes a lot of sense if you're sick. I've talked about this before, but in terms of mandating, I think it just misses the point. There's so much emphasis put on masks when masks should be one tool in the tool shed or one tool in the toolbox. It misses the point by at least 90 degrees or 180 degrees. Yeah, I would just say in nursing homes, people should wear them. If you're in an enclosed space that's not well ventilated with somebody you think might have it, it can definitely make sense. So there's situations where it makes sense. There's a lot of studies, and people will just use one study to back their point of view. Again, this is science. This is a very imperfect science, and the quality of mask making and ability and the quality of mask wearing, I mean, it's all over the board. So carrying out a really good study on this subject is practically impossible, I would say. I will still say that I think over masking is part of what is causing so much social discord amongst people. There's endless stories. I mean, but I don't think I'll get into those for the sake of time. What else? I wanted to, I think this one's interesting because this was a very, the largeness of the study out of Wuhan recently in the science journal Nature. Wuhan has about 10 million people in it. They tested 92% of them. So they tested almost 10 million people from May through June. There were only 300 asymptomatic cases detected, and subsequent tests of 1,174 close contacts of those asymptomatic cases found no new positives. So that was interesting. You know, there's a lot of studies around masks. I'm only citing this one just because it's made out of 10 million people, which is a lot. Next subject, testing. How is testing? It's still crap. There's, you know, the swab, the oral and/or nasal swab, the PCR testing. I get asked a number of times about the cycle threshold. And that has to do with a swab detects a certain amount of genetic material from the virus, and then it's amplified a certain amount of times, or cycle thresholds. And depending on the lab, what they decide their cutoff is, that could be, it's typically in fives. So it's typically 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, or even 45. Now, the issue is that the more times you cycle it through, the tiniest little speck of genetic material will eventually get amplified enough to produce a positive result. And so a cycle threshold of 20 on the lower end, like I think they use in Singapore, if you get a positive result from that, you can, it's like, it's real, it's a true positive because it's only being amplified a little bit relative to if you're testing, if you're running it through 45 cycles. Again, you can get a positive test from like the tiniest little snippet of genetic material that may not even represent even one whole virus. Now, you need a bunch of viruses to actually get infectious or infected if you're going to get infected, if you're malnutritioned, right? And so the cycle threshold value is super important, and it can make a lot of false positives, which is what would give you a case-demic, right? And most of the labs in the US, I believe most are using a cycle threshold of 35, though some are higher, some are lower. And so, you know, Fauci himself, you know, a few years ago before this pandemic, said that if you go above 30 and up towards 40, you can, quote, forget about having meaningful results. And that was him. Now he's saying the opposite. So it's interesting to note that. I will say on the testing front, it looks like by day 10 from contact, so you come in contact with a person 10 days out. If you are going to get sick, 98% of people will get sick within those first 10 days, or will become infectious, I should say. So you might be asymptomatic. But if you're going to become infected and infectious, you'll become that, 98% will become that within 10 days. Which is why the CDC, I think just yesterday, kind of came out with their, yes, we still believe in a 14-day quarantine from contact. However, depending on the local circumstances, I think is the wording, you might consider a 10-day quarantine only without testing, or a 7-day quarantine with a negative test. And I think this is actually, I mean, the CDC's messed up a few times over the past 9 months. for sure. I think this is a good recommendation. And, in prepping for this talk, I actually learned that it looks like if you do a swab test on day 5 to day 7 after coming in contact, and you get those results back negative, I think that's very good way of scientifically saying you can come out of quarantine. So I think it makes sense, a lot of sense. So I'm glad to see that, because 14 days is a lot harder than 10, which is a lot harder than 7. Now, it's still usually taking a couple days to get results back, so that even if you test on day 7, you still might end up with a 9 or 10 day quarantine or even longer. I will just mention that thus far, curative.com seems to be a good place to go to get testing if you want testing, the swab PCR testing, as they have gotten results out within 24 to 48 hours, which frankly is actually faster than we can get from Quest through our own office. So I want to mention that. Additional testing, we can still test IgG, the long-term antibodies, through Quest. I think it's more of an exercise in curiosity, though, at this point, because those antibodies can decrease. And, if you catch, they have a certain threshold where they call it positive for IgG antibodies or negative. And if someone gets the virus, actually makes antibodies, they might never make enough to even become, quote, positive on a test. And then those will wane over time, but you'll still have some memory B cells and or memory T cells. At the other end of the spectrum, you might get somebody who gets infected, you might make your antibodies, and they might go off the charts high. And those will probably last longer. Maybe they stay positive for, we don't know how long, but at this point, some people are definitely still positive at 6 months, very positive at 6 months. Those could go away pretty rapidly. You're still going to have memory B and memory T cells to mount a response. So whereas in the beginning I was testing more people with antibodies, I've definitely cooled off on that, because I think it's more of an exercise of curiosity. Having said that, we do have a rapid antibody test in the office where you can get IgM and IgG markers. The results come back in about 20 minutes. It is a blood draw, and it's cheaper than I think anybody else does it for, it's $60 in our office. There's this rapid antigen testing, which tests for actual protein, the spike protein. So it tests a protein as opposed to genetic material. It tests a piece of this protein from SARS-CoV-2. It's not very sensitive, but if it does come back positive, it's a very good sign that you are infectious. And this is the 5-minute test, as some people would refer to it as. This will probably, a test like this, a rapid antigen test, will hopefully come out sooner rather than later, although it's probably not going to be super affordable and super accessible until the spring. But in theory, if you can bring this cost down to a few bucks, people could be testing this 2 or 3 times a week in certain scenarios. And enough testing, even though it's not very sensitive, when you do it repeatedly every 2, 3, or 4 days, then it becomes a good test, right? And so this could really be used quite well in the workplace, where there's companies where there's a lot of people, schools, universities, like that's a huge one, because I think that's so important, especially our underserved socioeconomic folks, kids. I mean, they are being obliterated this year, and I think the gap is being spread out. I was talking to someone last night from my running club, and he serves on one of the South Central LA regional centers. And he said, for school in the underserved area, 40% of kids don't even log in to their Zoom education calls, school calls. So, it's something where you won't see the, we're seeing the immediate effects, but there will be long-term effects where these kids are probably affected for the rest of their lives by this. And is something that should be taken under great consideration with regards to lockdowns. Therapies, let's get on to therapies. So prevention, so I'm kind of going to break it down into prevention, exposure. So if you actually do come in contact with somebody who has it, there's a few methods. And then therapy for actual COVID, right? And so I'm going to give, again, my little FDA disclaimer. I don't want anybody watching this video later and accusing me of selling things illegally. But this is just what I would give to myself or a loved one, all right? You happen to be listening in. So on the prevention, vitamin D, like dog, and we'll go over that later, with some vitamin K2, with magnesium. Magnesium because it's a very useful cofactor in helping vitamin D out. And vitamin K2 because vitamin K2 should always be given with vitamin D. They play off of each other quite nicely and keep calcium in the proper part of the body. Zinc, if you're low in zinc, you don't want to do too much zinc, but zinc with quercetin. A small dose of melatonin could be useful, especially if you are older. For melatonin purposes, I'd say maybe over 50 or 60, definitely if you're above 65. And then just some good basic trace minerals. I'm a huge fan of Ion, the Ion liquid still, a spore-based probiotic like Megaspore, and then full spectrum CBD products too, or full spectrum hemp products, I should say. They do a lot to balance out the immune system in a preventative on a preventative front. Takes a good couple weeks, even month for those types of products to really kick in, but they serve our body quite nicely, serve our immune system quite nicely. Hydroxychloroquine, from a prevention standpoint, I still read the literature as this could be useful. Taken, only if you're high risk, though. I don't recommend this for just everybody. And only when given with zinc still. There does seem to, the way I read the literature, there's still some prevention usefulness to hydroxychloroquine. Nebulized and or oral Ion I mentioned. Air purification, I still think this is really important. I hope everybody's breathing clean air. Most of you live in Los Angeles here on this call. It's been a little while whenever the fires were now, but I sent out an email recommending either the molecule, Air Doctor, Air Oasis, or IntelliPure. Because in my mind, if you can get 8 hours of good clean air while you're sleeping, even if it's only in your bedroom, that's phenomenal, and it gives your lungs a chance to relax and detoxify themselves. Now, after that is hilarious. I got multiple emails accusing me of promoting a bad product, and it was for each of those. So I had a couple people send me basically bad reviews about the molecule. I had a couple people send me bad reviews about the Air Doctor. Same with Air Oasis, although I didn't get any bad emails about IntelliPure. My experience with the molecule, I have a few of them at home. We have a couple in the office. they completely took away the smoke during the fires. So I know they're doing something. I also have a couple of Air Oasis filtration systems on the main HVAC system for the office here, as well as at my home. And honestly, our air has been phenomenal since we brought those in. So, every product has its downsides. There's always going to be some unhappy customers, and each product is going to be promoted by different individuals. At the end of the day, do your research and get a good one. And for prevention, sorry folks, but I got to go back to the not so sexy basics. Again, this is sunlight, the clean air, clean food, clean water, happy thoughts, mask-free, deep breathing, socializing as much as possible in a safe way, and exercise. And that includes, mild lymphatic movement. So that could be walking, just really light exercises, agility, strengthening, all of those. Again, these are not sexy things, and they take time and effort, but the payoff is so huge. Now, onto exposure prevention. After an exposure, I'm still a big fan of nebulized hydrogen peroxide, nebulized or nebulized silver, for both pre-exposure as well as kind of post-exposure, a spray up the nostril of something along the lines of silver. There's a lot of herbal throat sprays. We have one in the office, but there's a lot of good herbal throat sprays. Like if you're socializing, do it before and do it every half hour or hour during and afterwards. Zinc lozenge, kind of pop one in your mouth and suck on it as you're going into a potential contact situation, or if you come into contact unknowingly but realize afterwards, pop it right away. There's also probiotic lozenges. Same thing, right? If you can build up good probiotics, good bacteria in your nasal and throat passageways, it's going to make it much harder for a viral, any virus really, to come in and attach and get into your body, kind of break that barrier. There's also, now I have not had a chance to prescribe this yet, but there's, in prepping for this talk, actually, I learned about ivermectin, which can be given as a single dose, either, again, pre-exposure and or immediately post-exposure. But you do a single dose, and then 72 hours later, you do one more dose. I was reading about it. There seemed to be some pretty good literature on it. The document I got it from was from the Eastern Virginia Medical School, where they have an article that links to some good literature on it. So interesting. Now therapies, again, with the kind of FDA disclaimer. Vitamin D, and again, I will cover that in a few moments, but vitamin D like dog, vitamin D like dog, please use it. With K2 and with magnesium. Also vitamin C, orally, possibly intravenously. We've certainly done that in the office. And then higher doses of melatonin. Nobody knows the exact best dose, but probably upwards of 10 or 20 milligrams, which is a lot, twice a day. Quercetin with zinc. The quercetin helps zinc get into the cell. Andrographis, the herb. And then that ivermectin, again, but this time maybe one dose and then one dose just 24 hours later, as opposed to 72 hours later. There's steroids, absolutely, but not initially. Only once it gets into this kind of the pulmonary inflammatory stage or cytokine stage, right? So you wouldn't use steroids in the first 10 days. You wouldn't use steroids until you are rather infected, or if you're symptomatic, or if you were mildly symptomatic but had a lot of comorbidities or a few more comorbidities, then maybe steroids right away. Steroids definitely have a huge potential role. They are saving lives. I think that's why the death rate in the ICU, it continues to drop in most countries at this point. NAC, or N-acetylcysteine, around 900 milligrams a day. Glutathione is a huge one. NAC is the precursor to glutathione. So I would recommend both, though, if someone were needing actual treatment. Glutathione can be taken orally. It can be done intravenously. We do that in the office. It can also, I've given it to a few people now, a number of people actually, inhaled. So that can be great for the lungs. And also anything that goes into the lungs is almost immediately into your bloodstream as well. Hydroxychloroquine, I'm a little bit less bullish on this one from a therapy standpoint now. It might be useful. It also might not be a good idea far down in the treatment road, maybe at the very beginning of treatment. But whereas prevention, I definitely still see a use for it with zinc, maybe a little bit less so in the second half of the therapy window. We have something in the office called Cytomix. It's a homeopathic product made by Guna. It's sold as kind of it's always been, for years, it's been sold as a kind of cold and flu product, but it's called Cytomix, and it literally brings down that cytokine storm. We have a little bit of a surplus. I thought we'd have more cases. So we are currently offering 25% off. It's only, I think, $30 to begin with. So we have a little 25% discount on it while our surplus supplies last. So that is a little plug. Another huge plug that I'm going to make right now on the therapy front is for O3D infusion. And now this is kind of, this is a huge plug for ozone in general. So you can get ozone at a lot of offices in Los Angeles. I highly encourage you to go explore those opportunities. I have spent 6 months and $30,000 to bring O3D infusion to our office. The impetus for it was for my mother-in-law, who has idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, in case she got COVID. Now, this took a lot longer, mainly because I wanted to bring down the cost from thousands of dollars per session down to something at least a lot more reasonable. Dr. Cook, who I learned it from up in the Bay Area, he has been doing it for over a year. I learned it from him. I've been up there 3 times or 4 times now to learn it. He's been getting amazing results. He also charges $5,000 or $6,000 per session. And he can do that because he gets such great results. There are a few other places in the country who are offering this. It's, as far as I know, above $1,500 at every place. We have it for $695 a session. Half of it, if you have traditional Medicare, half of that we can get reimbursed through Medicare. So your out-of-pocket kind of materials cost is about half that. This is too good not to have it here. And I have not had a chance to use it on anybody with COVID, but I strongly believe in it. Again, I brought it in for my mother-in-law, and I'm super happy I did. The results thus far on her oxygen saturation readings have kind of gone beyond my wildest expectations. So that's a huge plug. Just know that it exists. And if you know someone who really has a few comorbidities and has COVID, let them know about it at least. It's on our website, so they can always go kind of get a general idea about it under the services tab. But again, I don't like selling stuff, but again, this is just too good not to have available to people. The results, the few studies on ozone from around the world, and there's actually quite a few at this point over the last 9 months. The results are just too phenomenal to ignore. And while we've been doing ozone in our office for many years now, this form is definitely superior. And you can go to the services tab of our website to learn more. Now I'm going to move on to long haulers. Long haulers definitely seem to need a lot more mitochondrial support. Ozone is a great mitochondrial support, by the way, but there's also a number of other supplements that can be used for mitochondrial support. Infrared light is also great as a mitochondrial support. So there's other options there if long hauler becomes an issue. Again, these prevention, exposure, and then actual COVID therapies, going back to our statistics at Oasis, I mean, they've been phenomenal. And so we've done it we've used them on our own patients. I've used them on my own family members. And again, no hospitalizations, no deaths. I think we're doing really well. And most of you know a lot of these things already, but hopefully you kind of walk away from this, even if you know this. Please just spread the word that there's these options to not, so you don't have to die from this. And then I want to talk more about vitamin D. Vitamin D, I believe, is probably the most underutilized therapy for both prevention as well as actual therapy that is not being talked about. To date, there's actually a really good recent article. I will send this out in the email where it reviewed 14 of 15 vitamin D studies. There's a more recent one that has come out right after this paper came out. So that I'm aware of, there's 15 vitamin D studies. 12 of them have found not just quite a correlation with COVID-19 infections, but like insane correlations, okay? Now, most of these are observational. I am not positive about this. I know there's been at least 3 randomized controlled trials on vitamin D. I mean, numbers that pop out are from a couple of the good studies. Again, any study can be kind of ripped apart depending on who's doing it. I mean, there's no perfect study ever, all right? But there are some studies are better than others. And out of the good studies, I kind of highlighted some numbers. 97% of people in the severe group had vitamin D deficiency, which is they had an average of 14. Now, normal lab reference ranges, say 30 to 100 is kind of the normal reference range. Most labs in the US, at least, that's what they say. So again, 97% of people in the severe COVID symptom group had vitamin D levels of an average of 14, which is really bad, versus just 33% in the asymptomatic group who had an average level of 28. Which I would say is still actually vitamin D deficient. And then fatality rate 7 times higher in the low vitamin D group. In this particular study, 21% versus 3% died. That's 7 times, not 7% more. That's 7-fold. That's amazing. I'm pretty sure I emailed this out a good month ago, 3 or 4 weeks ago at this point, but it's so powerful that I'm going to kind of talk us through it again. So I believe it's the most recent randomized control trial, which is better than an observational study. There's been a number of observational studies, which really, it's hard to prove correlation, but it can certainly give us guidance. So recent randomized control trial, and I actually, so that person, Ari Witten, who has the Energy Blueprint podcast, he did it. He sent this email out much better than I did because he substituted the word vitamin D with the word vaccine. And then at the end, he said, you know, just kidding. The interesting part is that vaccine was actually just vitamin D. And the reason it was so amazing, and again, I'm going to spend a couple minutes walking us through it. There were 76 people in this trial. So it's not a huge trial, but the numbers you'll see are very staggeringly black and white. 26 of those 76 people got no vitamin D. They got kind of whatever that hospital's normal therapy options were. So 26 people. And these are all people who were in the hospital with COVID pneumonia. So a severe situation, right? 26 people got no vitamin D. They got standard of care, whatever that was. 13 of those 26, so 50%, exactly half of them, went into the ICU. And 2 of those died. All right, so kind of normal-ish numbers, really, sadly. Now in the vaccine group, otherwise known as the vitamin D group, there were 50 of those, 50 folks. So 26 in the no vitamin D group, 50 people in the vitamin D therapy group. Only one of those 50 went to the ICU, and that person did not die. So small study, but staggeringly different results. Now that, you know, I think the dose was 100,000 units on day 1. And then I think 3 days later, they had a dose of 50,000 units. And then 3 days later, they had another dose of 50,000 units. So this is very high dosing of vitamin D, but just so powerful. And if this had been a vaccine study, these results would be run 24/7 on news outlets. Of course, it's not. It's vitamin D, which can be gotten over the counter for pennies on the dollar. Now, I think vitamin D should be taken with vitamin K2 and magnesium and probably have some even more amazing results, but this is quite interesting. So what level of vitamin D do I suggest? I suggest a level between 45 and 60. So far out of the studies, the observational, the randomized controlled trials, it seems like anybody who can get it above 45. Now you don't want it too high. So I actually don't think a level of 90 or 100 is good. I think that probably comes with some unwanted side effects. But 45 to 60, that seems to be the sweet spot. And I would put a lot of money on this bet, that if we were to make that one single recommendation to people to get their vitamin D levels into 45 to 60 range, that deaths would decrease by probably 9 or 10-fold. I would bet that. I would bet a lot of money on that. And I would win, I'm pretty sure, but that's my bias. Now, vaccines, and then we're going to tackle the subject of vaccines, and then we'll wrap it up and then go to your Q&A for today. Vaccines, so what about them? So far, there's still no genetic drift. In other words, while there are mutations, there's still no new strains of this, which is great for vaccinations. It's great for our long-term natural immunity. It's also great for vaccines because it means we will probably have long-term immunity. And supposing that vaccines really are effective, those will give us longish-term immunity. We don't know that yet, but it's looking good on that front. Now, I would just acknowledge the vaccine industry and Operation Warp Speed and Fauci and everyone involved. It is simply incredible what they have done in terms of getting vaccines that are going to become available in the next couple weeks to people in the US. I mean, it's incredible what they've done. Like it shows the power of what we are capable of when we kind of put enough money behind something. I have listened, in prep for this talk over the last 2 weeks, once I decided to do it, I listened to Paul Offit, Anthony Fauci, and Peter Hotez, kind of probably 3 of the foremost vaccine experts in our country. I counted it, probably listened to about 12 hours of those 3 over the last couple of weeks. So I think I have a pretty decent understanding. Of course, I've listened to other people talk about this more in the natural front as well. I just want to be as well educated on both sides as possible. So I'm sure that most of you have kept up to date on the news. So some of this is probably telling you what you already know. But when will the vaccine really be ready for the masses? There are 3 leading vaccines at this point. More to come after those 3 vaccines, but 3 leading manufacturers at this point. No meaningful data, though, available to the public. Though the FDA is going to be reviewing the Pfizer one. So there's Pfizer / which is in conjunction with a technology group called BioNTech out of Germany, I think it is, but it's basically known as the Pfizer vaccine. There's the Moderna vaccines, and then the AstraZeneca / Oxford. AstraZeneca and Oxford are working together. So Moderna, Pfizer, and AstraZeneca are the 3 leading ones. Pfizer, all of them have at this point are well into the phase 3 trials. Pfizer and Moderna are both mRNA vaccines. They've both in the past few weeks given reports that they're 95% effective. I have no idea what 95% effective really means. Have to see the data. So far, I am not impressed. I might be impressed. I'm open to being impressed by their data. Pfizer has already submitted their emergency use authorization. The FDA is going to review 1 week from now on December 10th. And then frankly, I'd be shocked if FDA doesn't approve it. And then I hear within 24 hours, Pfizer is going to be shipping it out. So we're probably 8 days away from the first non-trial participants of actually receiving this vaccine, which is incredible. Just from a logistical standpoint. A deep freezer is needed for the vaccine. 2 shots are given 21 days apart. The deep freezing presents an issue, maybe not so much in the US, but if this is given to, 3rd world countries, like that's going to be a huge issue because that's the medical freezer, the deep freezer that is needed. So I'm not sure how useful that's really going to be for the large portion of the underserved world, as well as portions of the underserved US. The Moderna vaccine, only a refrigerator is needed. So that's probably going to, I don't know, I'm thinking that's probably going to get a little bit more use out of it. 2 shots are given 21 or 28 days apart. So pretty similar. The Moderna has also submitted for emergency use authorization. They're going to go before the FDA on the 17th of December, so 1 week after the Pfizer vaccine. I'm sure that will get approved too, because there's no way it's not going to be approved. They supposedly on the FDA panel, they have what they call, I don't know, I'm forgetting the terminology, but basically people without special interest. That's a load of baloney. Almost every person on that panel has special interest in vaccines. So that's why I'm sure that both of them will be approved. AstraZeneca / Oxford. This is also 2 shots 1 month apart. That also only requires a refrigerator, so probably very useful. It's a little bit different. It's a viral vector vaccine. All of these have pretty similar numbers. The Moderna, they're claiming 90 of the first 95 participants to develop. So all of them have had around 30,000 people in their trial. Approximately half got the vaccine, approximately half got a placebo, which to their credit, the placebo has actually been saline solution. Aside from about half of the AstraZeneca, I think it's AstraZeneca. I think half of the study was done in Brazil, half of it was done in England, and the English part, folks, that placebo group got a meningitis shot. But Moderna and Pfizer, I think, I'm pretty sure their placebo groups were actually saline injections, which I like. I think that's better science. What was my point? Oh yeah, most of them have had close to, if not more than 30,000 participants in it. The Moderna vaccine, they say 90 of the first 95 participants to develop COVID-19 had received the placebo, and the other 5 had actually gotten the active vaccine. So that's how they're coming up with their 94.5% effectiveness. Pfizer said that of 170 confirmed cases of COVID-19 among its trial participants, 162 were in the placebo group versus only 8 were in the vaccine group. So, according to those couple sentences, I mean, they look phenomenally effective, right? But I need to see the data before forming any opinion, really. AstraZeneca was a little bit more complicated. Of 131 participants who developed COVID-19, 70% overall were protected, they say. And there was an interesting, one group got half dose initially with a full dose as their second shot. The other one got 2 full doses. And for some reason, the group that had the half dose for their first of 2 injections was actually 90%. Versus the group that got 2 full doses were only 62% protected. So something very interesting about that. I don't know what to make of that. I'm sure we'll learn more in coming weeks and months on that front. Johnson & Johnson, it seems like they might be the 4th vaccine coming up behind those first 3. Are vaccines safe? I was emailed this exact question multiple times. Is the vaccine going to be safe? Well, number one, there's not just one COVID vaccine. There will be 2 almost immediately, probably 3 very soon, and more to come this spring, I'm sure. In general, I've mentioned on previous talks, there are a couple of really good vaccines out there. There's some really bad vaccines out there that I think ought to be recalled. Is the COVID vaccine safe? I have no idea yet. We have to see the data. I will reserve my opinion on that front. Is it really going to save us all? Will they be useful on a large scale? I'll talk a little bit more about that. My reservations on these vaccines, on these COVID-19 vaccines, or SARS-CoV-2 vaccines. Again, I've said this multiple times, but the data have just not been published yet. So independent parties need to do some data crunching. We all need to see the numbers. Does the vaccine actually prevent transmission? This is an interesting one. Fauci himself said the vaccines may not prevent the spread of SARS-CoV-2. And what it looks like is, well, it probably makes people less symptomatic, so the severity of infection will be minimized. Those folks who were vaccinated, if they do come in contact with the virus, they might still be infectious. The vaccine itself is not going to make them infectious to others, but they might get the vaccine, think they're protected, come in contact with someone who actually has COVID, get the real virus, get the actual SARS-CoV-2 virus, their immune system will be working, will suppress the severity of that infections, but they could still cough all over somebody and still infect somebody. So, it looks like this is quite possible. So we will see. And this could be a major hit on what people are thinking the vaccine is going to do in terms of saving us all. I don't know, time will tell. In these studies, by and large, people with chronic diseases and pre-existing conditions were excluded from these trials. Who dies from COVID? Almost exclusively those people with pre-existing conditions and chronic diseases. So I don't know, that's a huge one there. We have very limited data on if they actually worked in the elderly, meaning over 65. And I don't think any data on, I don't think any of them have used children yet, for better or worse. So we just don't know about that. We don't know about the long-term immunity, although I suspect with enough boosters, with enough boosters, they're going to work. They're going to produce some immunity from it. So right now they're 2 shots approximately 3 to 4 weeks apart, but there might be boosters after that. The Pfizer vaccine, I mentioned this requires a deep freezer. That presents challenges to rolling it out. But there are others that don't require that. I have questions about, so this goes kind of into the functional medicine. What we do in functional medicine is we kind of consider the whole person and try to get down to the root cause. And a huge root cause of chronic disease, chronic conditions, autoimmunity is what else is in the vaccines. And I don't know what else is in these vaccines. A big fault of these studies is that they have skipped over animal studies. They have combined phase 2 and phase 3. We're barely into the phase 3 portions of these studies. And they are, for monitoring side effects, they're very interested in, did you keel over and pass out? Did you have some major reaction? They don't care about, okay, did you have a little arm fatigue or arm soreness or a little bit of fatigue or a little bit of malaise or even fever for a day or two afterwards. They consider that okay, which it's not necessarily a bad thing, because that is a sign of your immune system actually reacting to the vaccine, which you want. The whole point is for your immune system to react. But vaccine manufacturers and US government suck at looking at the long-term sequelae of potential side effects from vaccines. And that's probably my biggest question. Now, of course, you got to balance it out with the severity of deaths that are occurring now. So, my point is that's just one concern, one thing that I'm thinking of. I think Paul Offit and Peter Hotez have both wondered about autoimmunity. Are these vaccines going to create an autoimmune situation? So, someone with an autoimmune condition might not want to do one of these vaccines right off the bat. I'm not sure. It's a major consideration that I at least would think about. I know some of these vaccine trials are going to become unblinded. In other words, the placebo group, the people who got placebo are going to be offered the actual vaccine, which is going to make long-term study to monitor for potential side effects impossible, nearly impossible, which is quite convenient for the vaccine companies. Again, I understand the part of the reasoning. You want to be able to offer protection, right? But it also just minimizes the ability to look for these long-term complications, potential long-term complications from the vaccines. So that's another huge reservation of mine. And then the big one would be mandates, vaccine mandates that are probably going to happen. I can almost guarantee they're going to happen. That's my bias, but we'll see. I was asked, what is your greatest fear in regards to the path we're on? And I think vaccine mandates being put into place and then watching people accept those mandates blindly, and then for kind of a new round of discrimination to occur based off of that. I think that's coming in 2021, and that concerns me. It concerns me big time. I think private institutions will be able to do that. I think I saw a headline, Qantas Airlines is going to require a vaccination card, for a COVID vaccination card. It's a slippery slope, and I hope it doesn't go too far. Vaccine hesitancy, there was I think it was a study on nurses where 66% were hesitant. I don't know the specifics of that study. I don't know how many nurses were polled on that one, but it's still kind of interesting. 66% said they were very hesitant to get a COVID vaccine. I was asked, will vaccines be helpful in curbing this pandemic? Yes, I do think they will be. I would be shocked if they're not helpful in curbing the pandemic. We're going to see a huge second wave. We're already seeing it. It's going to get worse, or if it doesn't get worse, it's going to last for a while here, because again, December and January are always the worst respiratory disease month, virus disease months of every year. So will the vaccines decrease the severity of COVID-19 cases and deaths? I do believe they will. Based off of the limited data we have, absolutely they will. I don't know by how much. Maybe they won't be all they're cracked up to be, and start in terms of being able to completely halt this pandemic, like I think we've been led to believe. But again, vaccinated people might still be able to spread infections. So it just might not be the magic bullet that we've been hoping for. But I do believe that it will absolutely help curb the cases and severity and deaths, which is fantastic. Are vaccines even needed? No, because it goes back to the germ theory, and because of what I spoke about in the way I take care of myself and the way I try to help others take care of themselves. I don't think a vaccine is needed, with the caveat that a vaccine that works, that has minimal side effects, would be lovely for those with comorbidities, nursing homes. So no and yes. There are some really good vaccines out there right now, not COVID I'm talking about. So I am not anti-vaccine. I think vaccines should be made a lot safer. I just have there's a lot of questions. I think a lot of people have a lot of questions about these vaccines that are rolling out. Am I going to get a vaccine? For the reasons I just mentioned, why would I? I'm also young, and I also have all these tools at my disposal. And I do a pretty good job. I'm not an A+ on all those unsexy basics, but I get at least a B on most of those subjects. So I'm not a fair sample, but I asked that question because I have been asked that question many times now. I think a better question would be, am I going to recommend that my mom get a vaccine, get one of these COVID vaccines, right? How old are you, Mom? 73, 74. She's certainly got a couple of, I would call them mild comorbid conditions or chronic diseases. She has atrial fibrillation, chronic Lyme disease. So, she's definitely not a low risk, but I just haven't seen enough data yet to recommend this. And again, I mean, she's not in a nursing home. So if she can get a B or B plus or an A minus or an A or an A plus in doing those unsexy basics and take her vitamin C and take her vitamin D with K2 and some magnesium and maybe one or two other things, like, I like her chances. And life is all about increasing your chances, right? I mean, I could do all those things and then walk out on the street and be hit by a bus and die. So life is never a sure thing. All of you know that. I want to emphasize that, though, because I think we have been led, the media would lead and politicians would lead us to believe that we should save every life at all cost. Yeah, get off my soapbox there. So no is the answer on a vaccine for my mother for now. Maybe some data comes out that's just too hard to ignore, and then I might say yes, right? We also have real quickly before, because I forgot to write this down, but we have a homeopathic remedy. It's called vaccine defense. I think I always encourage it for anyone who's getting any vaccine. It's cheap too. If I do get a vaccine, which one should I get? This is also a really good question. I don't have a great answer. I'm not sure at this point. There's not enough data. We are intentionally, anytime you do a vaccine, you're intentionally genetically modifying yourself. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. We don't know the long-term consequences of injecting messenger RNA into our systems. Having said that, we are a pile of shit with a lot of with a lot of viruses in us, and we are, half of our genetic makeup. Half of my genetic makeup currently is from viruses over bazillions of years. So, is intentionally genetically modifying ourselves with a messenger RNA vaccine a bad thing? I don't know. It's just something to think about. In someone who's immunocompromised, because of the way the AstraZeneca vaccine is made, I think there might be a question of if someone who is immunocompromised might be better served by getting either the Pfizer or Moderna vaccine as opposed to the AstraZeneca vaccine. We'll have to see. And my last piece, remember the vitamin D vaccine randomized control trial? Why do I need a vaccine if I have vitamin D in high doses, much less at a 45 to 60 level from a preventative standpoint? Real quickly, the shutdown, I will send out a couple links in the follow-up email for you to look at. But young people, I don't know, every study on the socio-emotional front from COVID-19 lockdowns is phenomenally horrible. 1.1 billion people are still estimated to go hungry this fall, winter, spring, next year due to lockdowns. 1.1 billion with a B. I still will say I have never seen this level of anxiety or depression in my practice since 2011 when I started Oasis. I have, discounting what you see on social media or the news, just my personal experiences of talking to somebody in person and hearing, their loved one or their friend or whoever died. It's about a 1-to-1 in terms of personal accounts of people. This is personal in-person accounts of folks who have died from COVID-19 versus personal accounts of folks who have died due to lockdown and depression and anxiety, meaning anxiety, depression led to heart attacks that should not have happened or suicide. I mean, I have not heard this many personal accounts of suicide combined in my last, ever since I've been a doctor in 1 year. Right before this, someone was telling me about their son's best friend who just committed suicide, literally just because of depression. Yesterday, my last patient of yesterday, her brother died basically of depression. and the alcoholism that it led into. My wife's coworker's dad died of a heart attack. He shouldn't have died of a heart attack. Heart attacks happen when you're too anxious, when you're stressed. It has much less to do with a actual blood vessel blockage than it has to do with sympathetic clamp down, which is stress response. Again, I could go on and on. Kelly, our family nurse practitioner, who also works half-time up in the ER at USC Verdugo ER here, just in yesterday or 2 days ago, our meeting. So Monday night, she worked in the ER, and she was just like, I saw 10 people with suicidal ideation, and it ranged from ages of 25 to 80. I really believe that when you break it down, COVID-19 cure is worse than the disease itself. I think, and there was a study, I will send this out. It was an analysis as of August 31st, and it basically said they estimated that 18 million life years were lost, will be lost in the US due to COVID-19 lockdown, compared to somewhere between 1/4 and 3/4 of a million life years lost from COVID deaths themselves. In other words, this is highlighted, I'll highlight it this way. You know, last night I was at a running practice. I said something, someone else kind of snapped back. Well, I know 2 people who have died of COVID personally. And I'm like, and I just said, you know, well, what were their medical issues going into it? And one was end-stage lung cancer, and the other one had 2 heart surgeries, the most recent, which was in January of 2020. And so those 2 people, I think this just highlights it, like how many years of life left did those 2 people have? Probably not many, compared to just these last 2 people. So these are just the last 2 experiences of mine on both fronts that I'm highlighting. The person's son's best friend, he's young. I don't know what the exact age is, but 30-ish probably, committed suicide. That's how many life years were just lost, 30, 40, 50 life years. And then the person yesterday, the brother, I suspect the brother of my patient was probably around 50-ish. So again, how many life years lost was that? It's a lot more than those from last night, the end-stage lung cancer person and the person who had 2 open heart surgeries, not just heart surgeries, but 2 open heart surgeries. So I really think it's something that needs to be looked at. Again, the other individual from last night who worked in South Central LA Regional Center and was explaining that 40% of low-income students don't even log on to their school Zoom calls. That's going to set those kids back in life, you know, perhaps immeasurably. So I would just encourage people to really think about that. And I think it's not acknowledged when lockdowns are put in place. I don't think it's like we could have governors and government officials give us more emphasis on, hey, we're locking down, but here's what you should do, right? And it goes back to those unsexy basics, right? Maybe socializing becomes more difficult, but maybe it's encouraging, hey, put a little bit more emphasis on socializing appropriately, right? So I promised to only go another like 2 minutes. Actually, I'm just gonna kind of wrap it up. Again, I hope you leave here feeling empowered. Those unsexy basics and the few preventative strategies I strongly suspect could lower the death rate tenfold easily. And you know, this really could have been a time of great health education, great opportunity, but there's still the opportunity to start today if you haven't started, or if you're doing a couple of those things, but you still have a couple of those categories to catch up on, or become a B plus student on, like start today. There's still time. Like we still have so much potential to just spread this knowledge and smile and be happy. You are all powerful people and you are capable of so much. So please spread this, whether it's spreading the email that comes out or just talking. A lot of you are really good at talking. I know that. Stop watching the news. Again, be kind, smile. And with that, I'm going to shut up. I've talked way too much. And I'm going to take a sip of water and open it up for questions. And just go for it. Actually, I see Nick A. raise their hand. Yeah, Nick.
Hi, Dr. Yoshi. How you doing, sir?
Excellent.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the thank you for all this information. And I'm a patient of your guys's. I have a interesting situation, which I think currently I've been quarantining for 10, 11 days. I lost sense of taste and smell on the 23rd of November.
Mm-hmm.
But back in June, I was told I had a presumptive positive test, but I've never tested positive for the antibodies. So just to give you some context, I'm very concerned, obviously, because I'm going on day 10 into 11. And I'm just concerned, what can I do? I've come to your guys' office many times, so I have a lot of the things that you suggested, but what are some other things I can be doing right now? For example, today, I was doing okay. Just as during your talk, I became extremely fatigued and felt weak and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
What are some things I can be doing? Because I don't want this to progress to, the next level.
Yeah, of course.
And I don't have any, there's no cough, thankfully. I have a mild grade fever, about 99.2, 99.5.
Mm-hmm.
No underlying health conditions or things like that. The only thing that's happened is the loss of smell and taste. I'm finding it difficult to eat, and so I'm losing a lot of weight because of that.
Got it. Well, first of all, I would, don't take this as my direct medical advice to you.
Right.
Caveat, but if you were my mother explaining all of that, I would say I doubt that you actually had it before. This is, especially with the loss of taste and smell, now it's almost assuredly that now you have COVID. And it goes back to, what I recommended before, the vitamin D with K2, magnesium, vitamin C, for sure. The melatonin would be a big one, especially if there's still fatigue and it can kind of come on that quickly, because that's probably a little bit of cytokine storm. It sounds like very mild. So I do suspect that you will be fine in the long run. Don't be too alarmed, or at least keep us up to date. But probably a high dose of melatonin, 10, 20 milligrams twice a day. That would be a highlight. Quercetin with zinc, definitely another highlight. And then it sounds like you're approximately, I think you said the 23rd, so you're 10 days into it. I'm not sure if Dr. Quiller Kelly is your provider, but steroids could be useful. Steroids are amazing medications. A lot of people are really opposed to ever being on steroids. Our body makes steroids all the time. They are not a bad thing. They are an extremely amazing medication when used in the short term. Steroids are very bad used long term exogenously, but short term they can be quite phenomenal. Sounded like you didn't have any lung symptoms, so I don't know that inhaled glutathione. If you did develop lung symptoms, I'd be a big fan of inhaled glutathione. That Cytomix, the homeopathic Cytomix would probably be good. That's cheap and also good. So those would be kind of some general things that come to my mind.
So very quickly, Dr. Yoshi, I wanted to actually, I wanted to come actually to the office tomorrow. I was thinking I need a steroid or something like that. Could I do that, or?
Gotta just call the front office, please, because they'll set you up. If you need something urgently, yeah, somebody
Yes.
will help you
Yes. Yeah.
one way or another.
Any kind of last question?
Mhm.
Anything I should be mindful of? It sounds, and my primary care doc has not been really helpful. That's why I appreciate you guys. Anything that I should be kind of looking out for that might be kind of red flags or?
No, you're going to be fine, first of all.
Okay, thank you.
The only thing to really look out for is low oxygen saturations. That would be
Okay,
the main one.
okay. Thank you, doctor.
Yeah, of course. I see Mindy Schinnerer.
Hi,
Hi.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So my question is around the preventative things that you mentioned, the vitamin D, K2 magnesium, the zinc. How do I know what amount to be taking of these things as a preventative?
Yeah.
Sorry if I missed that. I don't think you said amounts.
No, I didn't. And that's, I mean, I'll mention some amounts, generically speaking. That's why
Yeah.
I'm always a big fan of actually testing. There's kind of on a population level, it's good to make some general recommendations. At the end of the day, actually getting those levels, and you can get your levels of vitamin D, K2, magnesium, zinc, vitamin C. You can get all of those levels actually measured to find out a more appropriate dose that's actually
How would you get those measured though?
personalized medicine, basically. Um, I there's I mean, in our office to measure those, I would probably go through Vibrant America. They definitely measure those levels. You can't do like vitamin K2, vitamin C levels are not very well measured by Quest or LabCorp. Though through Quest and LabCorp, you can easily measure vitamin D, red blood cell magnesium, red blood cell zinc levels. So a few of those you can get done almost at any doctor's office to get the, although most doctor's offices will just measure a serum level of magnesium and zinc, which is not ideal. So you need red blood cell zinc, red blood cell magnesium, vitamin K2, vitamin D, and vitamin C levels. So again, personalized medicine is the best, but having said that, I realize not everybody can do that.
Right.
And it's pretty safe to say that most people are not going to get toxic with a vitamin D level of, or a vitamin D dosing of 5,000 IUs a day. And I just usually say, make sure there's some amount of vitamin K2 in there. And then magnesium is really my favorite product of magnesium. We have it here in the office. It's called Magnesium Breakthrough. Just 1 or 2 capsules of those a day is phenomenal. It has like 6 or 7 different types of magnesium. But in general,
Okay.
like go get some magnesium from anywhere, take it. And the only downside of too much magnesium is loose stool. So you can just titrate it according to loose stool. In other words, don't make yourself too uncomfortable, but take the maximal dose that you can take without getting disaster pants. Kind of the same thing with vitamin C, actually. Really, the only downside of vitamin C is disaster pants. Zinc, if you don't get tested, I would really just stick with like 15, 20 milligrams a day. What else? Vitamin C.
Oh, and that says with quercetin?
Zinc with quercetin, yes, actually.
So that comes in like that comes together, or are you saying those are 2 separate things that you?
Those are usually 2 separate things. It's actually pretty rare that they're, it's pretty rare that they're sold together. Quercetin, just as a prevention, probably 250 milligrams a day. Vitamin C, I'm still a big believer. Vitamin C as ascorbic acid, great as a therapy. Vitamin C is a whole food vitamin C source, not as ascorbic acid, is best as prevention. I have seen our Cataplex C from Standard Process in the office actually improve vitamin C levels. A lot of over-the-counter ascorbic acid has not improved vitamin C levels on blood testing, which is interesting.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
And then my other question is about the zinc. Do you recommend a tincture? You know, they sell it in the
Yeah,
in the
tinctures
tincture
are
form?
always good.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Sure.
All the information today was really great.
Yeah, absolutely. Rafi?
Thank you, Doctor. As you were pointing out earlier, you don't necessarily, you rightfully are concerned about the long-term long-term effects of the vaccine, the unknown factor. A friend of mine mentioned that their doctor was basically, and actually I posted the question on the portal if you have access to that. But in a nutshell, they were saying that if you've had the with the prior COVID-19 positive nucleic acid test and a positive serum antibody test, basically they're saying don't rush to take the vaccine unless you're in that super high risk group. Just want to hear your thoughts on that, please.
Yeah, anybody who's had COVID, either clinically speaking and or by antibody testing, I don't see any reason at this point to take a COVID vaccine. Now, could I change my mind on that in the future? Absolutely, I might change my mind, but at this point, because it really looks like we have long-term immunity. Dr. Shane Crody and Alex Setti out of La Jolla Institute for Allergy and Immunology are have showed that very eloquently in the lab. Just side note, I used to work in Alex Setti's lab and I had no idea what a big shot he was at the time. So it's kind of fun to go back, and he's like one of the world experts on this particular subject. So my ego inflated when I found that out, but that's a total aside. But no, don't take the vaccine if you have had COVID or have an antibody test positive.
They were also saying that individuals with a very low risk of poor outcome from COVID-19 and who have relatively low risk of SARS-CoV-2 exposure should not take the vaccine.
Correct.
Right.
Again, I mean, your likelihood of dying or even having a severe infection in the super low risk category is so minimal. I mean, you have greater chance of getting hit by a truck on the freeway. So, on the weighing pros and cons, yes, I would agree with that.
Last question: what's your personal, medical or otherwise, opinion about how do you think hospital care is going to change? Obviously, this has shown that there are limits. I mean, only a certain number of patients can be tended to. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, good question. I will say I didn't look at it for all the countries, but by and large, your chances of dying from this, if you get a severe infection, are decreasing, and it's been decreasing since April. In almost every country, the trend is just downward in terms of what's your risk of actually going to the ICU and or dying from this. And so it's not anywhere near zero, unfortunately, but it is decreasing, and it just goes back to doctors are learning more, unfortunately, and through anecdotal cases quite often, but we're learning more and more, like, is the convalescent plasma helping? It looks like maybe not so much. They have the monoclonal antibody that can be given. I think President Trump received that in a very high dose. That seems very therapeutic. It's a little bit harder to give thus far, but it's going to become more and more available. And so if you can get people well quicker, it also opens up spots in the hospitals. Those are just a couple. I think we've definitely in the past 3-4 months, I mean, doctors are really realizing when to use steroids versus when not to use steroids. It's very clear that like early on, antiviral type of medications actually do help, versus later on, it's more of a steroid that can make a huge difference. And so I think doctors are just like, slowly we're getting more and more information, and everything is moving the needle a little bit. More and more hospitals are actually using IV vitamin C or IV ascorbic acid. And then more and more hospitals honestly are actually starting to say, hey, maybe there's not a downside of doing a high dose vitamin D and zinc and melatonin. Like there are actually hospitals in the US that are starting to employ these more natural remedies because they have such a low risk profile. So, might we get overwhelmed? I mean, this is going to be a vicious next couple months. I have no doubt that this is going to be a very vicious next couple months, and it's going to, it's only going to elevate the fear, and it's going to elevate more people to want to take the vaccine, rightly or wrongly. So hopefully that answers a little bit.
Thank you.
All right, let me go to Vivian, and then we'll do Abdallah if you still have a question, although your hand just went down. So Vivian first. Oops, you are. Let me unmute you.
Thanks. I just did.
There we go. Okay.
First of all, thank you so much. Really, really good, thorough information. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the vaccine and the mandatory vaccine that you think is coming, very likely to come.
Yeah.
As a person who has an undiagnosed autoimmune condition, what could I do if an employer were trying to mandate this? I mean, I know it's kind of an early question, but I'm trying to get my ducks in a row.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering if you have any kind of idea of what you would do.
I mean, in the past, for someone with a medical situation where it seems like there might be more harm than benefit for a person receiving a vaccine, usually letters from the physician have sufficed. Honestly, usually a letter from the physician has sufficed. I don't know, unfortunately, I don't know that that's going to work going forward into 2021 and afterwards, because consideration is being lost, and people really are becoming they're taking everything to a black or white extreme. And that is happening. Again, I'm not that old, so maybe some folks who have been around on this planet longer than I have can offer more kind of broader insight. But I don't think it's, I think it's more severe in 2020, the division of right or wrong than ever before. And a lot of it is driven by social media, and we get these ideas and we hold on to them. And so if I'm a person of, up in the upper echelons of the company and I make this decision, it's kind of, you can leave if you don't want to work for us. And, private institutions can do that. At a federal level currently, the incoming President Biden cannot, at a federal level, cannot mandate a vaccine. As far as my understanding goes, I'm not a legal expert, but I believe he cannot mandate vaccinations, but he can certainly plead with governors of different states to make those mandates. I'm sure they'll get challenged in court, but in the meantime, they'll be mandated. On smaller scales, like UC, the University of California system, they just mandated the flu vaccine, which is preposterous in my opinion.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and so if the whole public UC system can do that, I don't know what's to stop a lot of institutions from doing that. Again, I mentioned, I think it was Qantas Airlines is going to require a COVID-19 vaccination card to be able to fly with them, and they can do that legally. So I unfortunately, I see a lot of situations where mandates are going to be mandates, and they're not going to be and dissonance are not going to be tolerated. Unfortunately, I hope I'm so wrong on this front. I really do. But
Thank you. Yeah, I
yeah.
hope so too.
Yeah, it's too early to know for sure, like you mentioned. But that's my take currently. Again, hopefully I'm wrong.
I was
Oops, you're muted. Vivian, you're muted. Oops, I can't hear you at least.
Yeah, I was just going to share a little bit more information if anybody's interested. What I've been reading is that a lot of employers are kind of trying to organize to get government backing if their employees go in either direction. So if they decide to mandate a vaccine, that they're protected if somebody has an adverse reaction, and if if somebody forgoes the vaccine and either gets sick or makes somebody else sick, that they have some kind of governmental protection if that happens. So I don't know which direction it'll go in, but that's what I've been reading.
Interesting. Thank you. I did not know that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Abdallah.
Thanks for the presentation. Very good information. I just had a quick question for family and friends that are not going to measure, right? Just want to confirm that it's safe to just carpet bomb with 5,000 UIs of vitamin D and K2 and the magnesium and 50 to 20 milligrams of zinc. And then if they do have COVID, and obviously the urgency would probably tell them that they would want to measure, but the urgency of the situation, can it still be recommended that they do the 50,000 units of vitamin D initially and then ration it down to 5,000? And if you can speak a little bit to like, what are your concerns with elevated levels of vitamin D?
Yeah, that's a good question. It is a pretty safe bet that 5,000 IUs of vitamin D is not going to cause any harm to anyone in the long run or short run. So it's pretty easy to make that recommendation. I mean, if you're talking about taking that for 6 months or a year without testing your vitamin D, I would discourage that. But over these next 2-3 months, when this second wave is really going to be here, I feel pretty comfortable saying that. Same with the high dose vitamin D of 50,000, given a couple times if someone becomes symptomatic. Again, we're talking a couple of doses of that. Even if that shot someone's vitamin D level up above 100 temporarily, the benefits are probably still going to outweigh the risks. And then their level will go down, assuming they don't continue to take a super high 50,000 IU dose.
Thanks. And the high vitamin D levels consistently, that's not good.
Yeah, too much of anything in this life is not good, unless it's a laughter. But when it comes to taking something exogenously through your mouth, too much of anything is not good. Too much water is not good. That can throw you into seizures, and people have died from that. So too much vitamin D, absolutely, in the long run, can certainly do more harm than good.
Thanks.
Yeah, sure. Melissa, I see your hand.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, thanks for all the useful information. It's been interesting. Some things slightly anxiety provoking, but interesting nonetheless. I'm wondering if you have recommendations. Like I noticed all your recommendations are, for like grown-ups, and I'm curious if you think that children should be kind of doing the same thing, or kind of what dosages, if they should, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's a really good question. With kids, I mean, everything's always it kind of always matters how much mass a person has. So in other words, how much they weigh. And while testing is always best to get a real level, most young children easily can tolerate 1,000 IUs of vitamin D, as long as it has a little bit of vitamin K2. There's liquid versions of it, so it's pretty easy to give a kid. You know, I don't know that they so much need magnesium, but I would probably for kids, I would limit it to like a little bit of vitamin D, about 1,000 IUs a day with food that has some K2 in it, some kind of a little bit of vitamin C, and some trace minerals. Like, in all of those can be gotten in a liquid that tastes fairly reasonable for little children, along with some ion. Those would probably be a very nice just foundation. At the end of the day, kids can transmit the disease, but the amount of kids who have had severe responses, much less deaths, is still exquisitely low. You know, I don't know the actual numbers, but probably 100 times more kids die in car accidents than from COVID. So I think it's almost a non-issue in terms of worrying about the kid's actual health. It's more about, okay, is this kid gonna transmit it to grandma or grandpa who has a couple of comorbid conditions? But those would be a couple of really nice, simple things to do for kids.
Okay, and when you say trace minerals, you're meaning like a multivitamin?
Good question. Typically multivitamins just have a couple of minerals in them. So I would recommend something more like, there's something called concentrates liquid minerals. There's a lot of trace minerals, but it should be a complete trace minerals supplement.
Okay,
Just
thank you.
because so much of our food, even if it's organic, is still lower than it should be in these trace minerals.
Totally. Okay.
Yeah.
So you don't have a specific like brand for kids or kind that you think that they should take, or?
No, mostly because there's a lot of good brands, so I actually don't carry one here. But I do like, I mean, at Sprouts or Whole Foods, I know there's Concentrates, it's called it, or Concentrates, Trace Minerals, something like that.
Thank you so much.
Actually, we do have it.
Appreciate it.
It's called, from Standard Process, it's called Trace Minerals B12. We do have that, but that's a little tablet, which is not ideal for little kids.
Right. Okay.
Let's see. Let me go with Linda, and then we'll go with Gail. So Linda, you are.
Okay, there I am. Hi.
There you are. Hi.
Good to see you. You talked about not knowing what to think about vaccines until you got the numbers. And I don't know what that means. And I don't know if you know whether you'll ever get the numbers or how the numbers are presented to people who would know how to read them.
Yes. Beautiful questions, exquisitely asked. And that's where, I mean, the leading three companies have not made any meaningful data available to the public yet. Within a few weeks, we should know at least the results of those, through the phase 3 trials. Those will be analyzed up one side and down the others, maybe not by the FDA panel as much as ought to be, but by others it will be. And that's where I'm gonna look forward to listening to people like on the one hand, very pro-vaccine, Paul Offit, Peter Hotez. I'm going to see what they say. I certainly want to know what they think. On the other hand, I'm going to listen to people like from more of the natural terrain, like build up your terrain standpoint, Chris Kresser and Ari Witten. I think both of them, those two folks they do a very nice job of kind of withholding their biases when reading the studies. And they will they will take down a lot of integrative or natural medicine ideas if studies don't support that, meaning Chris Kresser and Ari Witten are both very good at that. So I really appreciate those two. They spend a lot of their time analyzing these a lot of studies, especially the studies that are, at the forefront of societal consciousness. And so I'm going to listen to both sides over the coming months. And, truthfully, I don't know if we'll ever know all the results. However, I would suspect, whereas in past vaccine manufacturers have been less than forthcoming with some of their data, I would suspect that because of the broad scope of this situation, I would suspect that these companies' data on this subject is going to be gotten. And, especially when with 50% or around 50% of people in the US, at least, being very hesitant about receiving a COVID vaccine, like public health officials are going to want to convince people. And so they will present the data, how it suits them, but at the same time, they're going to have the data to do really good convincing. So I don't know, we'll see over the coming months. We'll see. And I'm going to, personally, I'm not going to sit there and sift through all the data. I don't have that time and I don't have that kind of training, but I'm going to listen to people who do on both sides of the spectrum to help formulate my opinion.
Okay, thank you. And then one other question is, if you get COVID-19 or any other viral or infection type thing, does that wear away at your vitamin D or your vitamin C? Or is it a level that is, maintained throughout illness?
Yeah, good question. Vitamin D, once it goes in your system, it stays at a pretty stable level for a few months. It's fat soluble vitamins, so it goes into your fat storages and you literally store it there. So it doesn't change super quickly, short of having a huge 100,000 or 50,000 IU dose. That gets it right in your bloodstream immediately to be used up. But in terms of your level actually being used up, that happens very slowly. Vitamin C, on the other hand, is water soluble. And so your levels you take it, it'll go up and then it'll come down. Take it, it'll go up and then it'll go down. Conversely, your body will use it up. That's why the level is going down as well. So vitamin C really does need to be, from a prevention standpoint, once a day or maybe twice a day, right? From a treatment standpoint, you're going to want to do that every hour or two.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. All right, take care. Gail, your hand is up.
Hi, happy holidays, first of all. And I appreciate over 2 hours of your time answering all these questions. If I could circle back to the issue of this season, less sunlight, more holiday stress, and those of us who have diagnosis of, for example, PTSD. And now we're being told to isolate from one another. And even when we try to come together with people who are willing, of course, many people are so frightened by the news that it's hard to get cooperation. From a clinical standpoint, I've heard rumors about something called an alpha stem, but something that goes back to dealing with a desire not to allow the psycho part of this drama to be a walk down a pathway to unnecessary disease of a wide spectrum, either from a supplementation. I know we need to get in the sunshine and we need to exercise. That's vital for any of us who have this kind of PTSD response, and unexpected anxiety attacks that I know you've witnessed, at least in my case. How can we better help us, help you, help us?
Yeah. It's a good question. It's kind of, I would say it's probably more of the question of the time, even though a lot of people don't realize it, or it's not forefront enough to people's consciousness. So it's a great question. One thing I will say is I don't think anybody ever has a panic attack or severe anxiety while they are moving their body. In other words, you're out walking, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you've maybe experienced differently, but when people are exercising, it's almost impossible to have an anxiety attack. When people are truly in a meditation of whatever type suits their choice, it's very hard to have an actual panic attack. When people are, even if you're not meditating, so to speak, if you're doing a simple, a real simple four-sided breathing technique, it is almost impossible to have anxiety. Another thing is, a lot of times when we focus our vision down, like I am right now on the screen, that puts us more into a focused, sympathetic state, versus when we allow our eyes to gaze up and really just kind of zone out and look at the horizon, preferably outside, not the top of your computer monitor, but if you can look outside at the horizon, that, and it just goes back to biological evolution, that puts you into a parasympathetic state like that. And so it really does go back to, hey, those are some simple things. And the more you can make those a habit, a routine habit, a regular habit, it will become less and less likely to actually have anxiety, much less a panic attack. And it's the small habits over time become where small habits consciously made over time will become unconscious over time, right? And so it's like, make a rule that every time you walk through a door, you have to take 1 or 10, just nice inhalations and exhalations. Make it a rule that every time you walk past a window, you kind of got to stop for 5 seconds and just kind of let your eyes gaze at the horizon, right? And then got to be diligent about going outside, even if it's just for a walk, but exercise in some regard, twice a day or 3 times a day. I'd rather have you go outside walking for 5 minutes 3 times a day than going out and walking for 20 minutes once a day, right? It's like the frequency is even more important with all of these things. And so again, it's kind of those unsexy basics, but the more we can make a habit of those, and in the beginning it needs to be very conscious, but over time they'll become less conscious, but they'll actually become habits that we do. And so that's my take on it.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Thanks for asking that question. It is 2:40. We have been going for 2 hours and 10 minutes approximately. Does anyone have, I don't see any more hands raised or any video monitor hands raised. So I think I'm going to call it. Thank you all for your time. It's always amazing to be able to, again, I so want people to feel empowered during this time. So please feel that power within you and spread the love, spread the words, spread the information, because our people, our family, our friends, and everybody at large in this world right now needs it more than ever, or more than in a long time. So peace out.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yoshi.